What if I told you that the most dangerous moment in any startup isn't when it fails, it's when it succeeds at the wrong thing? There's a name for this. The man who coined it built 3 companies before he figured it out. He calls it achieving failure, successfully, faithfully, rigorously executing a plan that was doomed from day one. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. Almost every startup that dies this exact way. The smart ones, the well-funded ones, the ones with the great teams and the great ideas. So how do you avoid it? The man who named this trap is Ries, and he didn't learn about it from a textbook. He learned it the hard way, by living it. Ries spent his 20s watching the dot-com bubble explode. He watched companies with brilliant founders and millions in funding and award-winning technology, companies that should have changed the world, quietly die. Not because their teams weren't smart enough, not because they didn't work hard enough, but because they were following a map that didn't exist. And then he made a discovery that changed everything. He noticed that the entrepreneurs who succeeded weren't doing what the magazines told them to do. They weren't building perfect products and launching them with fireworks. They were doing something stranger, something that sounded like cheating, something that, when he started writing about it, even seasoned investors told him would never work. He called it the lean startup. And in the 15 years since he first put those words on paper, his method has rewritten how the most successful companies in the world build new things, from Silicon Valley garages to corporate boardrooms, from 3-person teams to the United States government. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through every key idea in that method. We're going to look at why brilliant teams build products nobody wants. We're going to learn what the smartest entrepreneurs do that the failed ones don't. We're going to talk about the minimum viable product, the pivot, the metrics that lie to you, and the metrics that actually tell you the truth. By the end, you'll have a completely different lens for looking at any new venture. Your own, your team's, your company's. You'll know how to spot a doomed plan before you've spent a year building it. And you'll understand why doing less, when done right, is the most powerful thing a founder can do. So let's start where Ries started, with the moment everything fell apart. Chapter 1. The Achieving Failure Trap. In 2004, Ries is 26 years old. He's already failed at one startup. He's terrified of failing at another. And he and his co-founders have just built something they're absolutely sure will work. They call it IMVU. The idea is bold. They're going to take the world's most popular type of software at the time, instant messaging, and bolt onto it a 3-dimensional avatar world. Picture how this is supposed to feel. You're chatting with your friend on AIM like normal. Then your friend says, "Hey, let's talk in IMVU." You both download the add-on. Suddenly you've got a little avatar of yourself, and your friend's got one too, and you're not just typing messages anymore. You're hanging out together in a 3D virtual room. You can buy clothes for your avatar. You can decorate the space. You can do something nobody has ever done online before. Sounds amazing, right? They give themselves a hard deadline, 6 months, 180 days to ship the product. And for 6 months, they don't sleep. They argue about which bugs to fix and which to leave in. They argue about which features to cut and which to cram in. Eric, the chief engineer, writes thousands of lines of code to make IMVU work with every major instant messaging network of the era. Because if customers can't bring their existing friends, the whole strategy falls apart. They ship it, teeth clenched, apologies ready. The product is rough, the bugs are real, but it's out there. The whole world can now download IMVU, and then nothing happens. Not a few downloads, not a slow trickle, nothing. Customers don't even get far enough into the product to discover its flaws. They look at the homepage and walk away. Now imagine being Eric in that moment. 6 months of your life, sleepless nights, code you're proud of, a team you love, and the world is voting with its silence. In desperation, they start bringing customers into their office. Real teenagers, real people who use instant messaging. They sit them down and say, try this. The first customer customizes her avatar. She loves that part. Then they say, okay, now download the add-on. She says, what add-on? They explain it. She frowns. Then they say, now invite a friend to come chat with you. She looks at them like they're crazy. She says, invite a friend? Are you kidding me? I don't even know if this thing is cool yet. If it turns out to suck, my friends are going to think I suck. So they bring in another customer. Same response, then another, same response, then another. After dozens of these conversations, they finally understand. Their customers didn't want an instant messaging add-on. They didn't have a problem switching to a new IM program. The teenagers they were trying to reach already used 8 different IM clients at once. 8. Eric and his team had built their entire strategy on the assumption that switching costs were the enemy. Their customers had never even heard of switching costs. And here's the worst part. Eric's thousands of lines of interoperability code, the heart of his work, the engineering he was most proud of, had to be thrown out. Almost all of it. Useless. This is what Eric Ries means by achieving failure. He hadn't built the wrong product because he was lazy. He hadn't failed because he didn't care. He had executed his plan brilliantly, on time, mostly on budget, with a team firing on all cylinders. He had just executed a plan that was wrong from the very first day. And this is the trap most startups walk straight into. Ries tells the story of another company he consulted with that did everything by the book. They had a great idea. They wrote a comprehensive business plan. They forecasted conservatively that millions of customers would adopt their new product. They executed beautifully. They hired the staff to handle the flood. They built the warehouses. They built the infrastructure. They invested everything in being ready for success. And when launch day came, the customers didn't show up. Not in the millions, not in the thousands. The plan was so detailed, so committed, so locked in, that the company couldn't course correct in time. They had built a rocket ship. They needed a car. That metaphor is worth pausing on for a moment. A rocket ship needs perfect planning. Every booster, every fuel ratio, every angle calculated before launch. If you get it wrong, the rocket explodes. But you also can't change course halfway. Once it's flying where you aimed it. A car is different. When you get in your car to drive somewhere, you're not making perfect calculations. You're steering, you're responding. There's a detour, you take it. There's traffic, you find another way. You don't need to know every step of the journey before you start. You just need to know where you're going, and you need to be able to adjust along the way. Most business plans are written like rockets. Eric Ries is going to argue for the rest of this book that startups need to be driven like cars. Now here's what I want you to take away from this opening idea. Because the temptation when you hear the IMVU story is to roll your eyes and say, well, they should have done more research. They should have talked to customers earlier. They should have planned better. That is exactly the wrong lesson, because the real question isn't whether you plan more or plan less. The real question is when you're stepping into something that's never been done before, when you genuinely don't know who your customer is or what they want. What does good planning even mean? You can't plan your way out of uncertainty. You can only learn your way out of it. And learning, it turns out, is something most startups are absolutely terrible at. Why? Because we tell ourselves stories. When the product fails, we say, well, we learned a lot. We tell our investors, our employees, our spouses, at least we learned. But what did we actually learn? Could we prove it? Could we point to evidence? Or are we just decorating our failure with a comforting word? Eric Ries is going to take that word, learning, and he's going to rehabilitate it. He's going to give it a sharp, scientific edge. He's going to demand evidence. He's going to call it something very specific, validated learning. And it might be the single most important idea in this entire book. But to understand what validated learning really means and why it matters, we first have to redefine the word startup itself. Chapter 2. what a startup actually is. Picture a man in a rental minivan driving alone through small-town America in the year 2002. He's Japanese. He doesn't speak much English. He's logged 35,000 miles in the last few months, and he's not done. He's headed to all 50 US states, every Canadian province, every part of Mexico. By the time he's finished, he will have driven over 53,000 miles. His name is Yuji Yokoya, and he's not on vacation. He's a Toyota engineer. The company has given him a single assignment: redesign the Sienna minivan for the North American market. And the way Yokoya has chosen to do his job is to drive every single mile of road his future customers might drive on, in small towns and big cities, on highways and back roads, through Texas summer heat and Minnesota winter. He doesn't just drive, he watches. He sits in his rental Sienna and watches kids fight in the back seat. He watches a mother try to load a stroller through the side door. He watches grandparents complain about the cup holders, and he discovers something that should be obvious but isn't. The parents and grandparents may own the minivan, but the kids are the ones who rule it. The kids occupy the back 2/3 of the vehicle. The kids are the most critical and the most appreciative. If the new Sienna was going to win in North America, it would need kid appeal. So Yokoya spends an unusual amount of his redesign budget on the interior, the comfort features, the entertainment, the things that matter on a long family road trip. When the 2004 Sienna launches, sales jump 60% over the previous year. So what does any of this have to do with a startup? Here's what. Toyota has a phrase for what Yokoya did. It's called Genchi Genbutsu. In English, it translates roughly to go and see for yourself. You cannot understand any part of a business problem unless you go and see firsthand. Not the reports, not the spreadsheets, not what other people tell you. You go and you see. Ries argues that this is the most underrated skill in entrepreneurship, and almost nobody does it. Now to set up what comes next. Ries gives us the most important definition in the entire book. He says a startup is, and I want you to listen to this carefully because every word matters, a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Read that one more time in your head. A human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Notice what's not in that definition. Size isn't there, industry isn't there, whether you're in a garage or a Fortune 500 company isn't there, whether you're for-profit or non-profit isn't there. The only thing that defines a startup, in Ries's view, is that you're trying to build something new in a world where you don't yet know what's going to work. And that changes everything. Because if you accept this definition, then the goal of a startup can't be the same as the goal of an established business. An established business exists to execute, to run the playbook, to deliver the product reliably and profitably. A startup exists to do something else entirely. A startup exists to learn how to build a sustainable business in the first place. That's the shift. Stuff isn't the unit of progress. Code isn't the unit of progress. Features aren't the unit of progress. Learning is. Specifically, validated learning. Learning backed up by evidence. Learning you can prove with data from real customers, behaving in real ways. And here's the practical implication. If learning is what you're trying to produce, then every single thing your team does should be evaluated against one question. Did this teach us something true about our customers? If yes, it counts as progress. If no, even if it was hard work, even if it shipped on time, even if everyone is proud of it, it was waste. To see this in action, let's go back to 1982. A man named Scott Cook is sitting in his living room in Palo Alto, California. He's just left his consulting job. He has an idea. He thinks personal computers, which almost nobody owns yet, are going to change how regular families manage their money. He believes people are going to want to pay bills on a computer instead of by hand. But here's the thing. He's not sure. It's just a hunch. And in 1982, You can't Google whether your idea is good. So what does Cook do? He picks up 2 phone books, one for Palo Alto, where he lives, one for Winnetka, Illinois, chosen because it's a totally different demographic. And he starts cold calling random strangers. Picture the phone ringing in some living room in Illinois. A man picks up. Cook introduces himself and says, "I'd like to ask you a few questions about how you pay your bills." And here's what's brilliant. He's not asking, "Would you buy my product?" He's not asking, "What would you pay?" He's asking, "Do you find this frustrating? Is this annoying? Does this take too much time?" He's testing one specific leap of faith. He's testing whether the problem he wants to solve is actually a real problem in real people's lives. And what he finds is, yes, people hate paying bills by hand. That single discovery from a stack of phone calls gives him enough confidence to start the company that will eventually become Intuit, a company that today is worth over $100 billion. Cook didn't write a business plan first. He didn't build a product first. He didn't even create a website first. There were no websites. He just got out of the building, as Ries's mentor Steve Blank likes to say. He went and saw for himself. Get out of the building. Ukoya did it on the road. Cook did it on the phone. Almost every successful entrepreneur Ries studied did some version of it, and almost every failed one didn't. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is obvious. Talk to your customers. Got it. But the truth is, almost nobody actually does this. We don't do it because we're scared. We're scared the customer will tell us our idea is bad. We're scared that what we'll learn will mean we have to start over. We're scared we'll discover the thing we've been excited about for months, the thing we've already told our friends and family we're building, doesn't actually solve a real problem. So instead, we hide in our offices. We build. We tinker. We tell ourselves that once the product is good enough, the customers will see what we see. They won't. The rest of the lean startup method exists to get you out of that trap, to force you, with discipline, to test your ideas in the real world. And it starts with the most important tool in Eric Ries's entire toolkit, a tool so simple, so deceptively obvious, that it has become the most quoted concept in startup culture over the last 15 years. It's called the minimum viable product, and it is almost certainly not what you think it is. Chapter 3. The minimum viable product. In 1999, a man named Nick Swinmurn is standing in a shoe store in San Francisco. Frustrated, he's trying to find a specific pair of shoes, a brown size 11, brand he likes, style he wants. The store doesn't have it. He walks down the street to another store. They don't have it either. Third store, no luck. Swinmurn has an idea. He thinks, what if there was an online store where you could find any pair of shoes, any style, any size, any color, all in one place? This is 1999, remember. Almost nobody's buying anything online yet, let alone shoes. So Swinmurn faces a fork in the road. He could spend a year raising capital, building warehouses, negotiating with shoe manufacturers, hiring a team, setting up logistics, then launch his giant online shoe store and pray people show up. Or he could do something else, something almost embarrassingly simple. He picks option 2. Here's what he actually does. He walks into the local shoe stores in his neighborhood, the same stores that failed him, and he asks the managers a question. He says, "Can I take photos of your inventory? Just photos? I'll put them on a little website. If anyone buys a pair, I'll come right back here and buy them at full price." The managers say sure, why not? So Swinmurn takes pictures, he puts them on a basic website, and then he waits. Orders start coming in, not many, but some. And every time an order comes in, Swinmurn drives to the shoe store, buys the pair at full retail, packs it himself, and ships it to the customer. Now think about that for a second. This is the worst business model on earth. He's making zero profit, probably losing money on every sale once you factor in his time. There's no inventory system, no warehouse, no supply chain. It's not scalable. It's not impressive. If you described it to a venture capitalist, they'd laugh you out of the room. But Swinburne isn't trying to build a business yet. He's trying to answer one specific question. Are people willing to buy shoes online? That's it. That's the only question that matters. And he doesn't need warehouses or supply chains to answer it. He just needs a website, some photos, and a willingness to be the slowest, dumbest, most manual shoe store in the world for a little while. By the time the experiment is over, Swinburne has his answer. Yes, people will buy shoes online. He uses that data to build the real business. The real business is called Zappos, and in 2009, Amazon will buy it for $1.2 billion. This is what Eric Ries means by a minimum viable product. And here's what almost everyone gets wrong about it. When people hear minimum viable product, they think, it's the smallest version of my idea, the simplest feature set, the basic prototype. That's not it. That's not what an MVP is. A minimum viable product is the fastest possible way to start learning. It's whatever lets you test the riskiest part of your idea. It might not even be a product. It might be a video. It might be a photo. It might be a person pretending to be a robot. The word product is almost a trick, because what you're really building isn't a product. You're building an experiment. Let me show you another version of this. One that's so creative, it actually became a kind of legend in Silicon Valley. A young man named Drew Houston is trying to convince venture capitalists to fund a new file synchronization tool. He calls it Dropbox. The idea is, you drop a file into a folder on your computer, and that file magically appears on all your other devices: phone, work computer, tablet. Houston has a problem. The product he wants to build is technically extremely difficult. It requires integration with every operating system. It requires servers, encryption, sync algorithms. To build even a working prototype would take a year and millions of dollars. And every investor he talks to says the same thing. They say, this market is crowded. Nobody's making money in file sync. The problem isn't that important. Houston tries to explain. He asks them, have you ever actually used the existing tools? When they say yes, he asks, did they work? Did they actually do what they promised, seamlessly, magically? And the answer was almost always, no, not really. But the investors couldn't imagine the world Houston was describing. They couldn't see what he saw. So what does Houston do? He could spend a year building the actual product. He could risk waking up after all that work and discovering nobody wanted it. Or, and this is what he chose, he could do something much smaller. He sits down at his computer. He records a 3-minute video. The video is just him narrating his screen, showing what Dropbox is supposed to feel like once it works. The viewer watches a file get dragged into a folder and then magically appear on another device. There's no actual product running. It's mostly mocked up, but the experience looks real. He posts the video to a community of tech early adopters, people who love trying new things first. Overnight, his beta waiting list goes from 5,000 people to 75,000 people. Hundreds of thousands of people watch the video. They share it. They beg to be let in. Drew Houston didn't have a product. He had a video. The video was his minimum viable product. The video answered the only question that mattered. Do people want this? Yes. They want this so badly, they're signing up for something that doesn't even exist yet. Dropbox today is worth billions of dollars, and it started with a video. Now here's where it gets fun. Because Ries has another version of the MVP that I think is even more clever. It's called the Concierge MVP, and the idea is, instead of building a product at all, you serve one customer in person, by hand, manually, treating them like royalty. A startup called Food on the Table wanted to build a service that would generate weekly meal plans based on what was on sale at your local grocery store. Sounds like a complex piece of software, right? You'd need databases of every grocery store, real-time pricing data, a recipe matching algorithm, personalization, the whole thing. But the founders didn't build any of that. Not at first. Instead, they went to a moms group in Austin, Texas. They found one woman who was willing to pay $10 a week for a meal planning service. And then the CEO of the company, the chief executive, personally went to her local grocery store every week. He wrote down what was on sale. He matched it to recipes she liked. He hand-delivered her a printed packet of recipes and a shopping list. Every single week. They served one customer by hand for weeks. And in those weeks, they learned more about what their product actually needed to do than they ever could have learned from building software. When they finally did build the software, they built exactly the right thing because they'd already lived it. But the most jaw-dropping example of an MVP, the one that if you take only one story from this entire video, take this one, comes from two engineers in Silicon Valley. In 2007, two men named Max Ventila and Damon Horowitz wanted to build an artificial intelligence. The idea was you could ask it any question, even a subjective one like, "Where should I go for a drink after the ball game tonight?" And it would give you a good answer. Even Google couldn't really do that yet. Now, building real AI is hard. It's expensive. It takes years. So what did Max and Damon do? They cheated. Beautifully, they built a fake AI. Customers would send their question to what they thought was a brilliant artificial intelligence. Behind the scenes, and customers had no idea, 8 human beings were sitting in a room. The humans read the question. The humans wrote the answer. The humans pretended to be the AI. The product was called Aardvark, and Max and Damon ran this fake AI for 9 months. 9 months. Hiring more humans as demand grew. The customers never knew. Why did they do this? Because they wanted to answer one question before they spent years building the real technology. Would people actually use a service like this? Would they tell their friends? Would it be valuable? The answer was yes. Aardvark was acquired by Google for a reported $50 million. 8 people in a room, pretending to be a robot. $50 million. This is the power of the minimum viable product done right. You don't build the thing. You build the experiment that tells you whether to build the thing. And once you start thinking this way, you'll notice something. Almost every successful product you can think of started with some version of an MVP. The original iPhone shipped without features Apple is famous for now. No copy and paste, no third-party apps, basic camera. Early adopters lined up around the block anyway. The first version of Google could only answer queries about a few narrow topics. People loved it. Customers don't need perfect. They need useful. And if you wait until you're perfect to ship, you'll miss the only opportunity that actually matters, the opportunity to learn. But here's the question that should be hammering at the back of your mind right now. Once you ship the MVP, once the experiment is running, once the customers are actually using something, how do you know if it's working? How do you know if you're making progress or just spinning your wheels? That answer is harder than it sounds, because most of the numbers most startups track, the numbers that make founders feel like winners in a boardroom, those numbers are lying to them. And the worst part is, they often don't even know it. To see why, we have to go back inside IMVU, to a board meeting where Ries thought he was about to deliver good news and ended up discovering that the most flattering chart he could draw, the chart that made everyone in the room nod and smile, was actually telling him his company was dying. Chapter 4. How startups lie to themselves. Picture a conference room at IMVU. 2006, maybe 2007. Ries is standing at the front. His board of directors is seated around a long table. The lights are dim. A graph is projected on the wall behind him. The graph is beautiful. It's the kind of graph every founder dreams of. Total customers going up and to the right. Total revenue going up and to the right. The famous hockey stick curve, the signature shape of a company on the rise. Eric is proud. The board is impressed. He flips to the next slide. More good news. The product team has been hard at work all year, fixing bugs, adding features, improving the user experience. They've shipped daily updates, they've split-tested headlines, they've redesigned the onboarding flow. By every measure of activity, this team is crushing it. And then someone asks him a different question. They ask, Eric, of all the people who signed up for IMVU this month, how many of them are actually paying you? And of all the people who signed up 6 months ago, how many of them are paying you? And the month before? And the month before that? Eric pulls up the cohort chart. A cohort is just a fancy word for a group of people you're tracking over time. Instead of looking at totals, total users, total revenue, you look at each month's batch of new customers separately. You ask, of the people who joined in February, what % of them paid? And of the people who joined in March and April and so on. It's a simple idea, powerful. And when Eric showed his board this chart, everyone in the room went quiet because the cohort chart told a completely different story than the hockey stick. The cohort chart showed that month after month, no matter what the product team did, no matter how many bugs they fixed, no matter how many features they shipped, no matter how many headlines they tested, the percentage of new customers who actually paid for IMVU was almost exactly the same. It barely moved. The hockey stick was going up because IMVU was acquiring more customers, not because the product was getting better. Think about what that means. Eric's team had been working insanely hard, 20, 30, 40 changes a week to the product, and by the metric that actually mattered, whether their changes were making customers more likely to pay, they were producing zero improvement. None of it was working, and none of them had noticed. Here's why this matters for every single person watching. The vanity metric trap isn't just for tech startups. Every business has a version of it. The restaurant owner watching their total covers go up, while their per customer profit margin shrinks. The freelancer watching their hours billed go up, while their hourly rate quietly drops. The author watching their follower count climb, while their actual book sales flatten. Vanity metrics are everywhere. They're seductive, they feel like progress, and they will let you work yourself into the ground without ever telling you that what you're building isn't working. So what's the alternative? A vanity metric is any number that makes you feel good but doesn't tell you anything actionable about your business. Total signups, total page views, total downloads, total revenue. They sound impressive in a meeting. They look great on a slide, but they hide more than they reveal. Because here's the thing. Almost any number can go up. If you spend more on marketing, your signups will go up. If you launch in a new country, your users will go up. If a famous blogger writes about you, your downloads will spike. None of that tells you whether your product is actually getting better. What you need instead is what Ries calls an actionable metric. An actionable metric is a number that shows clear cause and effect. If we change X, this number moves. If we don't change X, it doesn't. It tells you what to do next. And the gap between vanity metrics and actionable metrics is the gap between a startup that learns and a startup that just looks like it's learning. To see this in action, let me tell you about a company called Grokkit. Grokkit was founded by a man named Varb Nevi. Varb had spent a decade as a test prep teacher, helping students study for big standardized tests, things like the GMAT and the SAT. He'd noticed that when students helped each other, they learned better. So he built an online platform that let students study together over the internet. Grokkit grew. They raised money. They hired a team. And like every modern tech startup, they were following all the right best practices. One of those best practices was something called lazy registration. The idea is, when a new customer comes to your site, you don't make them sign up right away. You let them try the product first. Once they've experienced how great it is, then you ask them to register. This was considered an industry standard. Every successful tech company did it. The reasoning seemed obvious. If customers experienced the product, more of them would sign up. Varb's team had built lazy registration into their product. It took significant engineering effort. They had to manage 3 different classes of users: anonymous visitors, registered trial users, and paying customers. Every system had to handle the complexity. Then they did something almost no one in the industry was doing. They tested it. They ran a simple split test. Half their new visitors got the lazy registration experience. Try first, sign up later. The other half were forced to sign up immediately, before they could see anything. Then they watched what happened. The numbers were identical. The same percentage of people signed up. The same percentage activated. The same percentage stuck around. The lazy registration feature, the industry best practice, had zero effect on anything that mattered. Months of engineering work. Best practice everyone in the industry trusted. Zero impact. And here's the deeper insight Fob pulled out of that experiment. If lazy registration didn't matter, it meant customers weren't making their decision based on actually trying the product. They were deciding based on what they saw on the homepage, on the marketing copy, on the registration page. The whole strategy needed to shift. Without that single split test, Grokkit could have spent another year adding more features to their lazy registration system, optimizing it, polishing it, telling themselves they were making the product better. They would have been working hard, they would have been productive on every standard measure, and they would have been wasting their time. Ries argues that this is what most startups are doing right now, today, this very moment. They're working incredibly hard on things that don't matter, and the only way to know whether your work is actually moving the needle is to measure the right things and to measure them honestly. Here's the painful truth Ries learned from his board meeting that day at IMVU. The hockey stick chart wasn't a lie exactly. The numbers were real, but what they were telling him was the wrong story. They were telling him his team was succeeding when his team was actually stuck. And once he saw the cohort chart, once he understood what was really happening, he had to make the hardest decision an entrepreneur ever makes. He had to decide whether to keep going down the same path, hoping things would turn around, or to admit something he didn't want to admit. That the entire strategy needed to change. That it was time, in Ries's most famous word, to pivot. Chapter 5. The pivot. First, let's clear up what a pivot is not, because the word has been used so loosely in the last decade that it's lost most of its meaning. A pivot is not quitting. It's not admitting failure. It's not pretending your old idea was a stepping stone to your new idea. It's not what people do when they're tired of their company and want to try something new. A pivot is a structured course correction. It's a deliberate change to one specific part of your strategy, while everything else stays the same. You keep your team, you keep your customers, you keep most of what you've learned. You change the one thing that isn't working. Think of it this way. The original meaning of the word pivot comes from basketball. You plant one foot on the floor, the other foot can move freely. You can spin in any direction, but you don't pick up that grounded foot. You don't run away, you pivot. Ries says that the question of whether to pivot or persevere is the hardest single decision an entrepreneur ever makes. And to understand why, let me tell you about a man named David Benetti. Benetti is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur. In 2009, he starts a company called Votizen. The original idea is a social network for verified voters, a place where people who actually voted in real elections could come together, share ideas, and recruit their friends to causes they cared about. Civic engagement through social technology. Benetti is smart about how he starts. Instead of spending 2 years and millions of dollars, he builds a minimum viable product in 3 months for about $1,200. He ships it. He measures. The results are not good. Of the people who visit the site, only 5% sign up. Of those, only 17% successfully verify themselves as voters. The retention rate, the percentage who come back, is too low to even measure. The referral rate, people inviting friends, is also too low to measure. Now here's where most entrepreneurs would do one of two things. They'd either give up entirely or they dig in and spend another year trying to make the original idea work. Benetti does something smarter. He spends a few months optimizing, running split tests, redesigning the sign-up flow, improving the messaging. His sign-up rate jumps from 5% to 17%. His verification rate jumps from 17% to over 90%. But the retention and referral numbers, the numbers that would tell him people actually love this product, those stay low. So Benetti pivots. He looks at what customers have been telling him in interviews. 3 things keep coming up. They love the voter verification technology. They love being able to take action on issues they care about. But they don't want to spend time hanging out in a social network with other voters. There's nothing happening there. It's a ghost town. So Benetti zooms in. He throws away the social network. He keeps the verified voter technology, and he builds a new product. A service where you could send a message to your senator or representative through Twitter, and it would be turned into an actual paper letter delivered to their office, verified by voter status. Hard to ignore. The numbers explode. Sign-ups jump to 42%, retention jumps to 21%, referrals jump to 54%, meaning more than half of the people who used it told a friend. But here's what's wild. Benetti isn't done pivoting. The new product, called AtGov, is working better, but only 1% of users are actually paying. So Benetti pivots again. This time he changes who he's selling to. Instead of individual activists, he goes to non-profits and political organizations and tries to sell them the technology directly. They sign letters of intent. They seem excited. Then the checks don't come. The deals don't close. The B2B pivot doesn't work either. So Benetti pivots one more time. He builds a self-serve platform. Anyone can come, swipe a credit card, and use AtGov to send messages from real voters to elected officials. 20 cents per message. This one works. 11% of users pay. The referral rate is 64%. The business has finally found its shape, and shortly after, Voterson raises $1.5 million from Peter Thiel, the famous investor who put the first money into Facebook. David Benetti pivoted 4 times in 1 year. 4 different versions of his company, 4 different bets, each one shorter than the last, each one cheaper than the last, each one closer to the version that actually worked. Now here's the part Ries wants you to understand. Benetti didn't fail 4 times. He succeeded 4 times. Each pivot was a successful course correction based on real data. He kept one foot planted, the vision of using technology to strengthen civic engagement. The other foot moved as he learned what worked and what didn't. Ries calls this the runway question. He says most people define a startup's runway as how much money you have in the bank divided by how much you spend per month. So if you have $1 million and you spend $100,000 a month, your runway is 10 months. But Ries thinks that's the wrong way to measure it. He says the real measure of a startup's runway is how many pivots you have left. How many times can you still change direction before the money runs out? Because if you can pivot faster, you have more chances to find the version of your business that actually works. Cutting costs doesn't always extend your runway. Sometimes it just means you go out of business more slowly. What really extends your runway, what actually buys you time, is the ability to learn faster, to run experiments faster, to pivot faster. And here's the most uncomfortable part of all of this. Ries says, every entrepreneur who has ever pivoted has told him afterward, I wish I had done it sooner. Why? Why is it so hard? 3 reasons. The first is vanity metrics. If your hockey stick is going up, you can convince yourself you don't need to pivot, even when you do. The second is fear. Admitting that your idea needs to change feels like admitting you were wrong. And admitting you were wrong in front of your team, your investors, your family, is terrifying. The third reason is the most insidious. It's that pivoting requires real failure, clear, measurable failure. And most entrepreneurs avoid failure so successfully that they never give themselves the data they need to know it's time to change. Let me give you one more pivot story. This one is even more dramatic than Benetti's. There's a company today called Wealthfront. It manages billions of dollars for retail investors. Big mainstream financial services company. You'd never guess where it started. Wealthfront started life as an online video game called Kaching. The idea was, let amateur traders manage virtual stock portfolios, find the ones who are good at it, and eventually let regular people invest real money alongside those amateur winners. The game blew up. 450,000 people signed up, a vanity metric to die for. But when they launched the paid version, the part where players could actually invest real money, only 14 people paid. 14 out of 450,000. So the team did the hardest thing they could do. They killed the game. They threw away the customer base. They started conversations with professional money managers, people who already had clients but couldn't grow their businesses. And they pivoted into a completely different company, focused on a completely different customer. Today, Wealthfront manages money for hundreds of thousands of real people. It's been named one of the most innovative companies in finance, none of which would have happened if its founders hadn't been willing to look at 14 paying customers and say, this isn't working. Time to plant the other foot. So how do you actually do this? How do you know when it's time to pivot? Ries says every startup should have what he calls a pivot or persevere meeting on a regular schedule. Not every week, not every quarter, somewhere in between. Every 6 to 8 weeks, maybe. The whole leadership team gathers. The product development team brings the data. The business team brings the customer conversations. And they ask one question: is what we're doing actually working? If the answer is yes, if the metrics are moving in the right direction, if customers are responding, if the engine of growth is firing, then you persevere, keep going, keep building. If the answer is no, if the metrics aren't moving despite hard work, if customer feedback keeps pointing somewhere else, if the engine of growth isn't catching, then you pivot, not blow up the whole company. Just change the one thing that needs to change. 1 foot planted, 1 foot moving. That's a pivot. Now we've talked about what to build. We've talked about how to learn whether it's working. We've talked about when to change direction. But there's one question we haven't answered. Once you've found the version of your product that customers actually want, once your MVP is working, your metrics are climbing, your strategy is sound, how does the thing actually grow? Because here's the surprise. Different products grow in completely different ways. And if you don't understand which way your product is supposed to grow, you'll spend money on the wrong things, hire the wrong people, and watch your startup stall out for reasons you'll never quite understand. Ries says there are 3, and only 3, fundamental ways a successful business grows. He calls them engines of growth. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you all 3. Chapter 6. The 3 engines of growth. In 1996, 2 young entrepreneurs named Sabir Bhatia and Jack Smith have just launched a free email service. The idea is simple. Most people who use email at that time have to use whatever email account their employer or their internet service provider gives them. Bhatia and Smith want to give people their own email, free, accessible from any computer with a web browser. They call it Hotmail. They launch with a small marketing budget, and growth is slow, painfully slow. Now, most entrepreneurs in that position would do what conventional wisdom says to do. Spend more on advertising, buy more banner ads, get press coverage, try to hire a marketing director. Bhatia and Smith do something else. They sit down and they ask each other one question. What if every existing Hotmail user could become a salesperson for Hotmail? What if every email they sent was itself an advertisement? They make one tiny change. They add a single line of text to the bottom of every email anyone sends through Hotmail. The text says, "P.S. Get your free email at Hotmail," and it's a clickable link. Within 6 months, they have 1 million users. 5 weeks later, they have 2 million. 18 months after launch, they have 12 million subscribers, and they sell the company to Microsoft for $400 million. One line of text. That's it. That's what built one of the fastest growing companies of the 90s. This is what Eric Ries calls the viral engine of growth, and it's the most explosive of the 3 engines when it works. The way it works is, every existing customer brings in more customers automatically just by using the product. You see this everywhere if you start looking for it. When someone uses PayPal to send you money, you have to sign up for PayPal to receive it. When your friend shares a Tupperware party, you become a potential customer. When someone sends you a Calendly link, you're being introduced to Calendly. The math of viral growth is what makes it so powerful. There's a number Ries calls the viral coefficient. It's just, for every customer who signs up, how many new customers do they bring with them? If the viral coefficient is below 1, growth fizzles out. 100 customers bring 50 new ones, who bring 25 new ones, who bring 12, and it dies. But if the viral coefficient is above 1, even 1.1, growth becomes exponential. 100 becomes 110, becomes 121, becomes 133, and the curve goes vertical. The most famous example of pure viral growth ever recorded is Facebook in early 2004. The site launches on February 4th at Harvard. By the end of that same month, 3.5 weeks later, 3/4 of Harvard's undergraduates are using it. No advertising, no marketing budget, no press, just students telling other students, students inviting their friends. That's a viral coefficient through the roof, and it's why investors were willing to pour money into Facebook even when it had almost no revenue. They could see the engine, but not every product can grow virally. In fact, most can't. And that's where the second engine of growth comes in. Ries calls it the sticky engine. The sticky engine doesn't depend on customers bringing in more customers. It depends on customers staying forever, basically. Think about your mobile phone company, or your bank, or the database software a company uses to run its business. These aren't products that spread virally. They grow because once a customer signs up, they almost never leave. The cost of switching is too high. The product is too embedded, so the company can grow steadily, even slowly, as long as new signups exceed the small trickle of customers leaving. For sticky businesses, the single most important number isn't how many customers you acquire. It's your churn rate, the percentage of customers leaving every month. If your churn rate is higher than your new customer rate, you're shrinking even if your gross numbers are going up. Sticky businesses live or die by retention. Get retention right, and you grow forever. Get it wrong, and you're filling a leaky bucket. And then there's the third engine, the one most businesses actually use, whether they realize it or not, the paid engine of growth. The paid engine is what it sounds like. You spend money to acquire customers. Each customer is worth a certain amount to you over their lifetime. Ries calls this the lifetime value. You can spend up to some fraction of that lifetime value on advertising, sales, or other ways to bring new customers in. If you can profitably spend less than each customer is worth, you grow. This is how most retailers grow. It's how most online businesses with ads grow. It's how most companies with a sales team grow. You find a way to bring customers in for less than they pay you, and then you do that again and again, as many times as you can. Here's the trap with the paid engine. Over time, your competition figures out what you figured out. They start bidding for the same customers. The cost to acquire each customer goes up. The margin between what you spend and what you earn gets smaller. And eventually, if you don't find a way to either earn more per customer or acquire them for less, the engine stalls. So the rule of thumb is, successful startups usually focus on one engine at a time, not all three. 1. They figure out which engine fits their business, and they pour everything they have into making it work. How do you know which engine is yours? You ask one question: where does my next customer come from? If they come from existing customers telling friends, you're viral. If they stick around forever once they sign up, you're sticky. If you can profitably pay to acquire them, you're paid. That's it. That's the question. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Most failing startups try to use all three engines at once. They spend on advertising and try to build viral features and try to focus on retention. They spread their resources thin. They never get good at any one engine. And they wonder why nothing's growing. Ries says, pick one. Get really good at one. Master one. The others can come later. But right now, in the early days of your business, pick the engine that fits your product and make that engine roar. But there's a deeper truth about growth that we haven't talked about yet. And it's something Ries borrowed from a completely different industry, from the factory floor of Toyota in Japan, from the people who, after the Second World War, figured out how to build the most reliable cars in the world with almost no resources. What does an auto factory have to do with a software startup? More than you'd think. Because the same principle that made Toyota the world's largest car manufacturer is the principle that lets a startup test ideas faster than its competition, move faster than its competition, learn faster than its competition. And that principle has a strange, almost counterintuitive name. It's called small batches. Chapter 7, Small Batches and the 5 Whys. In a book on lean thinking, a writer recounts a story about a man stuffing envelopes with his 2 young daughters. They have 100 envelopes to fill. Each envelope needs to be folded with a newsletter inside, sealed, addressed, and stamped. The daughters know exactly how to do this. They've seen it 100 times. They say to their dad, first you fold all 100 newsletters, then you put them in all the envelopes, then you seal all the envelopes, then you address them, then you stamp them. That's the efficient way. But the father wants to try something different. He says, let's race. You two do it your way. I'll do it the opposite way. I'll do 1 envelope at a time, fold 1 newsletter, put it in 1 envelope, seal it, address it, stamp it, then start the next one. Who wins? The father wins by a lot, even though he's working alone and they have 2 people. Even though their method seems obviously more efficient, he still wins. Why? Because the daughters spend time sorting and stacking and moving piles of half-finished envelopes around. They have to switch contexts between tasks, and worst of all, if anything goes wrong, they don't find out until almost the end. Imagine if the envelopes turn out to be defective and won't seal. With the big batch method, they've already folded all 100 newsletters before they discover the problem. They have to start over. But with the 1 at a time method, if the envelopes are bad, you find out on the first one. You fix it before you've wasted any work. This is what's called single piece flow. And it's the principle that lets a small startup move faster than a giant corporation. Lets a 6-person team beat a 60-person team. Lets a scrappy founder out-iterate a well-funded competitor. Toyota figured this out after the Second World War. They couldn't compete with American car factories that built huge batches of identical parts, so they did the opposite. They made smaller and smaller batches. They got so good at changeovers, switching their machines from making one part to another, that they could produce many different parts in tiny batches. And the more they shrank their batches, the better their quality got. The faster they got, the more they could learn. But here's what really set Toyota apart. They installed something called the andon cord. It's a literal cord that runs across the factory floor. Any worker at any moment can pull that cord. And when they do, the entire production line stops. Stops everything. For one worker noticing one problem, to outsiders, this looks insane. Why would you let one person halt a whole factory? But here's the genius. By stopping the line the moment a problem is spotted, Toyota fixes problems before they cascade, before 100 defective cars roll off the line, before the issue becomes a recall, a lawsuit, a brand crisis. Quality is built in. not inspected at the end. Now Eric Ries took this idea, small batches and on-code build quality in, and he applied it to software at IMVU. They built what they called a product immune system. Every time an engineer changed something, automated tests checked whether the change broke anything important. If it did, the change was rolled back, automatically, within minutes, sometimes within seconds. This let IMVU ship 50 changes a day. 50, while their competitors shipped 50 changes a year. But probably the most striking story of small batches isn't from a startup at all. It's from a giant company called Intuit, the maker of TurboTax and QuickBooks, a company with thousands of employees and decades of legacy processes. About a decade ago, Intuit was making QuickBooks the traditional way. One big release per year, a whole year of planning, then a year of building, then a launch, and they'd only find out at the end whether customers actually wanted what they'd built. One year, the QuickBooks team shipped a major overhaul of the online banking feature. They'd done all the right things: focus groups, usability testing, internal reviews. The day it launched, the feedback came in. It took customers 4 to 5 times longer to reconcile their bank transactions with the new version. The release was technically perfect. It was a disaster. Their Net Promoter Score, the standard way of measuring customer happiness, dropped 20 points overnight. They'd achieved failure on a massive scale, and because they could only release once a year, they had to wait 9 months to fix it. So they put a man named Greg Wright in charge of changing how the team worked. Greg's mission was simple to describe and brutally hard to execute: break the annual release cycle, get to small batches. In Greg's first year, he tried. He pushed for a mid-year milestone. The team worked hard, but their processes pulled them back. They missed the new deadline. They missed it again. They drifted back toward big batch development. Greg learned that, as he put it later, organizations have muscle memory. In Greg's second year, he tried again. Same result. The team would slip back into the old pattern. The big batch thinking was so embedded that telling people to change wasn't enough. The systems themselves had to change. So in year 3, Greg did something different. He stopped trying to change the deadlines and started changing the underlying tools. They built virtualization software so the team could ship a new version of QuickBooks to selected customers without risking anyone's actual financial data. They broke the big team of 15 engineers and 7 testers into small teams of 5 people each. They invited customers into the design process from day one, and then the magic happened. Instead of 5 branches of QuickBooks coming together once a year for a giant launch, they had 20 to 25 branches running constantly. Each team worked on a feature for about 6 weeks. They tested it with real customers throughout. They iterated. They learned. When the year 3 version of QuickBooks shipped, customer satisfaction was higher than it had ever been. Sales were up, and the team had transformed from a once-a-year machine into a constantly learning organism. But here's the part of building an adaptive organization that I find most powerful. Because Rise gives us a tool, one specific tool, that any team, anywhere can use starting tomorrow. It comes from Toyota again, from a man named Taiichi Ono, and it's called the 5 Whys. The idea is brutally simple. Whenever something goes wrong, you don't just fix the immediate problem. You ask why 5 times. Here's Ono's classic example. A machine stops working. Why? Because a fuse blew. Why did the fuse blow? Because there was an overload. Why was there an overload? Because the bearing wasn't lubricated. Why wasn't it lubricated? Because the lubrication pump wasn't pumping. Why wasn't the pump pumping? Because the pump shaft was worn out from contamination. And the reason for the contamination was that no one had installed a strainer. Notice what happened. 5 questions in. The problem isn't a fuse. The problem is, we don't have a system to make sure strainers get installed. That's a human problem, a process problem, not a hardware problem. Ries says that almost every technical problem traced back 5 whys. ends up being a human problem. Training, process, communication, and the only way to actually fix anything is to fix the root cause. This is the discipline that turns a chaotic startup into a learning organization. Not heroics, not late nights, not 10x engineers, just the quiet habit of asking why 5 times every time something breaks. Small batches let you see problems early. The 5 whys let you fix them at the root. And together they give your startup the one thing it actually needs to survive: the ability to learn faster than it can run out of money. That's the whole game. Learning faster than you burn through resources. Everything in this book, every story, every technique, every framework is in service of that one thing. Key takeaways. So we've covered a lot of ground. Let me give you the 5 ideas that, if you take nothing else from this video, will change how you think about building anything new. Number 1, stop measuring your progress in stuff. Stop measuring it in features built, hours worked, lines of code written, deals closed, or any of the standard markers of activity. Those measure motion, not progress. The only thing that counts as real progress in a startup is validated learning. Learning that you can prove, learning backed by data from real customers behaving in real ways. If you can't point to evidence that you understand your customer better today than you did a month ago, you haven't moved. Number 2, build the smallest experiment that lets you learn. Don't build the product, build the experiment. It might be a video like Drew Houston. It might be a photo like Nick Swinburne. It might be a person pretending to be a robot like Max Ventilla and Damon Horowitz. The point of a minimum viable product isn't to ship something small. It's to test the one assumption that, if it turns out to be wrong, makes everything else you'd build a waste. Find that assumption. Test it first. Number 3, watch the cohorts, not the totals. Your total users number can climb forever, while your business slowly dies. The only way to know if you're actually getting better is to look at each group of customers separately. What % of February's new customers paid? What % of March's? April's? If those numbers aren't moving, your work isn't moving them, no matter how impressive your overall growth chart looks. Vanity metrics will let you work yourself into the ground. Actionable metrics will tell you the truth. Number 4, pivot earlier than feels comfortable. Every entrepreneur who has ever pivoted has said the same thing afterward: I wish I'd done it sooner. The reason it's so hard isn't because the decision is unclear. It's because admitting you were wrong feels terrible, especially in public, especially in front of people you care about. But every month you spend defending the wrong strategy is a month you don't have left to find the right one. Your runway isn't the months in the bank, it's the pivots you have left. Number 5, pick one engine of growth. Master it. Forget the others. Don't try to grow virally and through paid acquisition and through retention all at once. Pick the engine that actually fits your product. If your customers naturally bring more customers, go viral. If your customers stay forever once they sign up, go sticky. If you can profitably buy your way to customers, go paid. Pick one. Pour everything you have into it. The others can come later. Spreading yourself across all 3 is how startups stall out without ever knowing why. Validated learning. Smallest experiment. Watch the cohorts. Pivot earlier. One engine. If you walked into your work tomorrow and asked yourself those 5 questions about whatever you're building, your startup, your product, your project, your career, I think you'd be surprised by what you find. Most of us are working hard on things that, if we were honest, we haven't actually tested. We're polishing rockets when we should be steering cars. Ries spent his career trying to build a science of entrepreneurship, not because he thinks creativity doesn't matter. The opposite. He thinks creativity matters so much that we can't afford to waste it on things that don't work. We can't afford to spend our lives building products nobody wants. We can't afford to mistake busy for productive, which brings us back to where we started. Closing. At the beginning of this video, I told you about a phrase Ries coined: achieving failure, successfully executing a plan that was doomed from day one. The image of the rocket ship, perfectly built, perfectly fueled, perfectly launched, flying exactly where you aimed it, toward nothing. By now, I hope you can see why that phrase matters so much. Because it's not the dramatic failures that kill most startups. It's the quiet ones. The ones that look like success right up until the last moment. The ones where everyone is working hard and shipping on time and hitting their goals, and the business is dying anyway. The hardest gift Ries gives us in this book is honesty. The honesty to look at our work and ask, is this actually moving anything? Is what I'm building today closer to what customers want than what I built yesterday? Or am I just rearranging the chairs? So here's the question I want you to sit with after this video ends. What's the one assumption you're making right now about your work, your product, your project, your life, that, if it turned out to be wrong, would change everything? And what's the smallest possible experiment you could run this week to test whether it's true? That's the entire lean startup method in one question, and the answer to it might be the most important thing you do all year. If you want to go deeper into Ries's ideas, the full version of the book is on Amazon and Audible. I've genuinely recommended it to almost every entrepreneur I know. The audiobook is excellent for a commute, and if this changed how you think about building things, even a little, hit subscribe. We go deep on books like this every week. Until next time, stop wasting people's time, including your own.